Hello, can you hear me all? Let's welcome three speakers from TEDx Gateway to our simulcast. Amongst us, we have Ishita, Dr. Welcome her on the stage. Lights, please. Ishita Katyal, welcome. Then Mr. Dilip Raha is coming. And of course, Captain Raghuraman, he's also on the way. I'll request Devang to sit on the stage for some time till the other guests come. And friends, most of you know by now because you heard her speaking. She's one of the youngest writer of a book of Simon's Diary at the age of 8. And she is one of the big coordinator and a supporter to TEDx as the youngest. And she had a great speech at TEDx Gateway in New York. So friends, I open the floor to all of you to ask questions to her. Volunteers will be taking a mic. Just raise a hand and they'll come to you. Ishita, are you ready? Thank you. This mic to her. No, it's not on. Deva.
Hi, Ishita. That was wonderful.
Thank you.
What would you like to do now?
Now I want to be a motivational speaker and I want to. Thank you. And I want to write more books on higher scales.
Wonderful.
Anybody else? Please raise your hands.
Okay. Hi.
Hello.
Here, this corner.
Yes.
First, thank you very much for opening up and inspiring us with
Thank
your
you.
extremely underage great achievement. My question is this. What's one habit that you think, or one activity that children do that you think adults and older people should do more often but don't do? It's something that children just seem to do and enjoy, but somehow in adult life is lost.
I think having fun, having more fun, spending more time with friends. I think nowadays, even in my community, my society, I know kids are on the phone as well, but more than them, it's the adults, their parents. Nowadays, grandparents as well, they're onto the technology. So I think one thing that children are doing is having fun, going down to play. They spend time with their friends. I do the same thing, and I think that's something adults should work on and do more. Yeah.
Thank you.
Friends, now amongst us we have Captain Raghuraman. Of course, you heard him on the stage. Let me tell you briefly, he has a unique career of 25 years. And of course, he's from army to corporate. Let's welcome him also. And he's also open to discussion. Really inspirational speech. We enjoyed hearing you. And of course, amongst us, we have Mr. Dilip Ratha also. You heard him also. And he's the first to analyze the global significance of remittances for the immediately important for migrants. Thank you, sir. We heard your concept of a people's bank. Are you open for questions now? I request all three speakers to be open for questions. Friends, raise your hands, ask the questions. We have 30 minutes only to close. Thank you. Volunteers, please look for the hands and move fast. Yeah, you can stand up and ask the question.
I just wanted Ishita to talk a little about her parents and how they have encouraged us so that we can learn from that.
Actually, to be honest, my parents are really supportive. I know some people do force their children. My parents are totally different. I think they're always encouraging me to do stuff. They give me a heads up for stuff. And I think if they have any feedback for me, then they give it to me and we discuss about it. I think they've always been supportive throughout my whole journey. And I think that each parent should be like my parents. They should give a chance to their children.
So we have Ishita's father. Can you please, sir, get recognized?
So, Ishita, I have a question for you. Maslow's theory is not something children at your age learn. So, where is it and what other things have you learned along it?
Actually, I heard from a lot of teenage friends that The Fault in Our Stars is trending. Now, I want to read books, and I know that book's not for kids, but I think I just wanted to read it. So I sat with dad and I started reading it. That's where I came to know about Maslow's theory. And I think each kid should know about it because there are certain needs which children don't meet with, and at an early age, they should meet with them. I think it gives them a really big platform to enjoy their life even more. And I think it's all because of my parents. They show me all these cool stuff and the latest news which comes up.
Ishita, I have a question to you.
Thank you.
I have a son of your age, and I don't know what he wants, and I don't think that he knows what he wants. So as a parent, it's a tricky situation for me whether I need to give him a direction or focus, or let him live the way he wanted to grow. Thank you.
Actually, I'm too small to answer that question. I think you know your child better than I do. You spend more time. So I think you can observe. You can observe what he likes to do. And I think at a point, he may or even you may understand if you keep observing. I don't know if I'm right, but...
My question is to Captain Raman, sir. Sir, this side. Sir, you mentioned that in military there is no discrimination based on religion or culture or anything. Based on your vast experience, what do you think? How can we reduce or eliminate this thing in our civil society as well? How can we change the mindset of people based on this?
It's a tough question to answer. And I'll tell you, let me answer this question with another example. When I moved from the army into the corporate world, a lot of my friends used to ask me, what is the difference between the army and the corporate world? And I used to answer that in the army, at least we knew which side the enemy was. Now, my sense is that when people have the luxury of security, Maslow's pyramid, when they believe security is taken care of, then they have all these ideas about discrimination and how you are different from me and how I'm different from you. When you're trying to survive, there is no question of not being able to trust your teammate. You may not like him. I've operated in special forces teams where you set these two guys in a dark alley, they might kill each other. But when they're in an operation, there is no better man to guard my 6 o'clock because he's really good at it. My sense is that as a society, we have to realize that the shifting of warfare which is taking place, it's the civilians who are the battlefield now. And the civilians are the combatants, and the civilians are going to be the victims. So if we do not hang together, we will definitely hang one by one. That's going to happen. Now that sense of being able to foresee the future, if we don't start imbibing, and I'm really glad that a lot of young people here, because you are going to inherit what's going to happen, and what happened in 2611 happened in Paris. In case you haven't guessed it, it's not going to stop. It's only going to keep on increasing now. So unless as society we start realizing that we are threatened by external forces, and whatever those external forces may be, we will actually be imploding. And that essence of understanding that the threat is out there, the enemy is out there, not amongst ourselves, is something that we have to start internalizing now. And my sense is that's the only way.
So, hello.
So, yeah, I wanted to ask a question. Oh, yeah. Third row. Yeah, actually, among the young people, there is a lack of willingness to join the army, or we do not have that thing for the army. Like we cannot relate to
Speak
your
for
much.
yourself.
Yeah, for me. So can you motivate us for that side? Because among the youth, of all I know, we aspire to become doctors or chartered accountants or artists like that. But joining army is not a question that arises in our mind.
So, okay, so I would tend to disagree with you. There are a lot of people who want to join the army. That is there, that is true. But I also agree with you that the Indian Army, I don't know how many of you know, is facing a terrible shortage of officers. We don't have a shortage in men. Men we have, but officers we are facing a terrible shortage, and that's largely true to your point. You may sit down, please. You may sit down. We are definitely facing a shortage, and that's because a lot of people have started equating material jobs. You know, you make much more money if you go and do an IM and join a corporate, and yes, you don't join the army for money. But there are 3 reasons why you should think about joining the army. And I'm not talking about some national patriotic national anthem. That's not the point. The point is, there is no career in this world where you will lead as a 22, 23-year-old captain. You will have 200 men whose lives you will hold in your hands. You can be the president of any place, but you will not be able to take men into battle who will follow you because you are their leader, who lay down their life for you. That's never going to happen. You can pay as much of money as you want. You can give. We have to take men into battle without ESOP, pay hikes, employee of the month, or any one of those jamborees. Right? Now that's a form of leadership which no organization can teach you. No organization can teach you how to take men into certain depth with your own personal charisma. That's it. That's it. And guess what? I don't know how many of you know this, that in the forces, there is no way I can give a bonus to a soldier who has done exceedingly well or cut the salary. There is no material tool. There is nothing. You have to lead with pure leadership, and no other career can teach you that. Secondly, to give you a little sense about my own career, and I'm just one of them. There are, I'm sure, hundreds and hundreds of people like me. I served in the army for about 11 years. Then I moved into the corporate world where I was a CEO for 3 different companies. And then I moved into the government to raise the National Intelligence Grid, which was set up after 2611. And after 5 years, I've now moved back into the corporate. And I can tell you that every lesson, every marketing lesson, every communication lesson that I have ever learned, I learned in the army. We had to learn how to communicate when we were dropping out of aircrafts, where we were parachuting down. We had to know how to communicate with each other. So anything that you need to learn for a business, the root lies in warfare. Because what is business? It is nothing but more contenders contending for less resources. And that is the definition of war. So a lot of us don't realize that the origin of business, origin of communication, origin of logistics, every technology, radar, computers, internet, X-ray, television, sonar, even commercial aircrafts, they all originated from war. So why would you want to learn it second-hand in a B school when you can go to the root and learn it directly from the fountainhead? And I think if you understood that part, my sense is a lot of people will realize that even if you gave 10 years to the army would equip you for a much richer and a much more empowered life. The last piece I want to tell you, and this was a question that was asked earlier also in the panel discussion that we were having. A lot of us assume we are going to live forever. We do. That's why we postpone doing things that we want to do, postpone talking to somebody, postpone writing a mail, postpone karenge baad mein, this, that. That career teaches you why every day is a bonus and why every day has to be lived in technicolor. And that ability to experience life. Think about it. Ask yourself this honest question. That suppose I took your life and filmed it with a 16mm film. You remember the old digital films? Yeah? And I strung it in this hall in a string like this. And I took a pair of scissors and started cutting bits and pieces out of it. And stuck it back together. You will not even notice the difference. because one day was like another day was like another day. And so if I took out months and years from your life and you don't notice the difference, you might as well have not lived those years. In that career, you will live every day. Every day that you walk this planet will be a day that you will experience from the morning till evening as something that you will nourish. You will truly live life when you see death.
Hello.
I don't know whether that answers your question.
Hello.
Or scares you more.
So,
So can we have questions for Dilip, please? Because of shortage of time.
Hi, Dilip. That was a very good talk. I just have one question for you. So, how will the profitability of the public of the bank work out, and how to make it viable in the long term so that the government supports it? Because the initiative is an amazing initiative, but I do not see any profitability for the bank to sustain on its own and the government to support it. So, can you please elaborate on that?
Thank you. The 80s, 90s, we had this whole thinking that you could actually serve the poor, the bottom of the pyramid, and at the same time make a lot of profit. I think that that doesn't work. It's really a contradiction. Serving the poor is very different from profit motive. That does not mean that you would be always giving money, losing money, because everybody has a limited pocket. The depth of the pocket is limited, and the needs are huge. So if you keep giving, one day you will have your pocket empty. So what I mean by my idea of People's Bank is that it should be financially viable, but the profit motive is not there. The motive is to serve the poor on a not-for-profit basis. And you can always have a decision that we will make only 3% profit, 1% profit, 30% profit, 100% profit, meaning that you do a cost plus markup. That should be the way. And you then decide how to lower the cost down so that you pass on the benefits more and more to the poor people. Let me give you an example, an elaboration actually, not an example, an elaboration of what I am saying. Remittances per year in the world are about $600 billion. Developing countries alone receive 440 billion plus. Official aid altogether is about 135 billion in the world, right? With a volume of, let's say, 400 billion going to the developing countries, there are, the average remittance transaction is $200 or so. So you are talking about 2 billion transactions per year. Okay, let's decide, are we going to charge 30 cents? Are we going to charge $1? Are we going to charge $5? And you would make still a lot of money. So that's my idea, that let's have the profit motive out. We say our mission is to serve the poor. We go for not for profit, but we are not stupid. We are not going to make losses either. So we will make some money just to survive, but we will pass on the benefit as much as possible to the people.
I apologize, my question is not. Hello? Closer, mic closer. I apologize, my question is not directed to one person. Here we have a very young person with a beautiful mind. We have an army officer who basically has so much to tell us from a different perspective, and we have a World Bank economist. My question directed is, the practicality today, when someone spoke about eliminating negativeness. Now, it's obvious that is not possible. It's always going to be there. My question is, today when I sit here, today when I read my newspaper, I'm on social media, I see that people with rational mind are there. We are all here, but why is it that we are not dominant enough? And when I ask myself this question, I realize, yes, motivational speeches and everything will help people have a much more rational outlook or a rational approach towards things. But that's not helping. So what will? Like, we have three people from different fields, from different perspectives, who think in a different manner. What is it that is going to help us? Because today, from everything that I've heard, whatever everybody's spoken is how are we going to make this world a better place. When you speak of remittance, when you speak of understanding, removing casteism, removing religion from understanding what am I serving for, And then talking about her, she's lovely. Whatever she said today is, I'm questioning myself, what was I doing? What was I doing when I was like 8 or 10? So my question is directed to y'all.
Sorry? You don't want to go first? Oh, I thought you said you wanted to go first. No, you don't want to go first. I'm not very sure I understood the question. Having said that, I think the underlying aspect that you're trying to talk about is that there is, if you look around, you open the newspaper today and you see a lot of negative news, right? So it gives you a sense that only bad things are happening. Only there is negativity, there is sadness, there is... The fact is, to my mind, happiness, sadness, all of these things are very relative. You are sitting in this room, you are possibly, everyone sitting in this room actually, to my mind, is possibly 0.0001% of humanity. You are well enough to be here, you are physically okay, you are, you don't need to hear a story about Siachen Glacier to realize how blessed you are. Just look out of your car window when you're going back home and you will see tiny children her age darting about in the traffic who have to earn money every day, otherwise they get beaten. And but for the grace of God, they could be your kids, they could be you. Now, instead of looking at what we have got, and very often what we have got is at the expense of what someone else has lost. Instead of appreciating that, we constantly keep looking at that thin slice that we have not got. Now, that is not the fault of your stars. That is the fault of the way you look at it. Because if you started focusing on what you have, instead of focusing on what you don't have, I think you are rich already. In every which way. I don't mean in a material way. I mean in every which way. You have pretty much everything that billions of people would give their right arm to get. Is that making sense?
Sir, this side. My question is to Captain Raman, sir. Sir, this side.
Before answering, let me just clear this out. What I understood from the question was how you should help yourself by these talks and all. Am I right? Yeah? I think I agree with sir, but also I think everyone better, they can help themselves the most. And I think that, I know some talks don't relate to us, some do relate to us, but I think if we get into them and we understand them in a better way, I think we in a way can help ourselves by getting positive vibes towards us. I think that's all from me.
Sir, my question is to Captain Raman, sir. Jai Hind, sir. Sir, the way you explained us, and we do know that our soldiers are fighting for us, for our fellow countrymen in Siachen glaciers and all, in the toughest situations, they are fighting for us. They even think about their families and all, they are away from them, and they're just doing the nation service. One thing I want to understand, because you are a part of them, and you are integral to them, I just want to understand, when the average soldier get a news in the newspaper or some other way, like there are people lynching for eating meat and all, or somebody calling Dalit children as dogs and all, what is the average feeling of the soldier? What do they feel? They are lying their lives for these countrymen, and what is happening inside the country and their thought prospect. What does the average soldier feels when he hear all these kind of things, like, you know?
So that was the theme of my talk. The theme of my talk was instead of narrating what the army should do for its country, it's also time for the country to start figuring out what they should do for the army. The nation, at the end of the day, these army soldiers and officers that we are talking about, we are not importing them from Denmark and Norway and Sweden. They are coming from the same villages, from the same Sholapur, Ambalapura, the small towns. That's where they're coming from. Now, when they are in the army, they are part of a Paltan, they are part of a unit, and that's their family. Have you ever thought about it, that an army soldier spends 10 months in a year with his unit and 2 months in a year with his family? So in 20 years' time, figure out what is his real family. which is his real family. So in a sense, when he's with that family, he is one unit. And when he hears about these things back home, it does perturb him, it worries him. And I think it's our job to take away that worry. It is not his job to take away that. The reason why you're sitting here comfortably, going to sleep, partying tonight, is because that guy is sitting over there. And he's telling you, go, party, have fun, nothing is going to happen to you. Not during my watch, not while I'm standing here. I think there is some responsibility we owe to him also, no? That's all I'm asking us to be aware of. That's it.
Dilip, I have a question. $600 billion, 200 billion transactions, mind-boggling numbers. It makes a commercial proposition by itself. If you charge $1 per transaction, 200 billion turnover. So forget any NGO taking it for serving the poor on a non-profit basis. It makes significant commercial sense to do it on a profitable basis. So why has nobody done it? Why isn't World Bank, IFC, which invests in many startups or even as a PE, why doesn't promote such ventures?
I think I answered that question before in a way that a lot of money being made out there. You know, some of the money transfer companies globally, especially in Africa, are more recognized than Coca-Cola. You see the brand and you know them more than you know Coca-Cola. The second largest money transfer company is recognized more than Pepsi-Cola in Africa. So a lot of money, billions of dollars of profits are being made by money transfer companies, but that does not serve the poor people, the migrants, the millions of them. There are 200 odd millions of migrants who are sending money, and they don't benefit from that. The reason they are paying too much in fees, the reason companies are charging so much from these guys is because in the name of money laundering regulations and other regulatory burdens, they are able to say that our costs are high, we segment the market, no players can come in, we have monopoly power, and we'll make money. So there, how do we deflate it? I think in the end, it will not be simply by sort of saying the market is perfect, it will take care of it. The entry barriers are really humongous, and some of the points that Captain mentioned about, you know, the national security issues. And there is a broader question that came up earlier about, you know, the question of national identity, me versus them. You know, is it Hindu versus Muslim versus Christian versus Jews? That sort of question. These are sort of related. And how does it all relate? I'm going to get into trouble in terms of trying to explain this, this whole complex thing. But if you have a motive that says that I'm going to serve the poor, and then on the side you make money, that's a very different model than saying I'm going to make money while serving the poor. Serving the poor is secondary. So what you would do is, sooner or later, somebody out there, the guy who holds the largest share in your company would say, give me some more money, I need more return. And if you can't produce it, they fire you. The corporation takes over. So what I'm proposing is a worldwide non-profit model where the motivation is non-profit to serve the poor, and on the side we make a lot of money. That's a conscious decision. That, how does it relate then to the next point about identity, national identity? You know, the single most important problem that we face in our neighborhoods, in our cities, in our states, in our country and globally is this whole concept of identity. The world was free long time ago. We were like birds. We could go wherever we wanted to. Migration is inherent to humanity. But now we drew the lines in the sand. You know that until 1800, 1900, you could go anywhere in the world without a visa. There was no concept of passport. Only after the world wars, we started the concept of visa, and now it has become so difficult that even if you are like Mr. Modi, you might also be refused the visa one day by somebody. Lines in the sand, that's what we have done. That lines in the sand have to change. Why are they not changing? Because of the identity. How can we get away from that sense and then recognize other people as people, and at some point recognize that even if somebody is white with blue eyes, the other one is black like ebony, they are also human beings. How do we do that? If you have another objective that you are working towards, a common objective like national security, like in the army, or simply let's do you know, let's work hard, let's produce more, let's increase the size of the pie. That sounds like economics talk. No, I'm just talking about it, whatever sphere you are writing, you are into producing, you are farming, whatever it is, let's do all better, and we all have a purpose towards which we are working. In other words, what I'm saying is, schools and labor market, if we are working together, 10 months in a year working together, 2 months we spend at home, that concept of identity would change dramatically. For that, you need a lot of jobs, and jobs don't have to come from like manna from heaven or from the government. Jobs, people, just take anybody, the man on the street, they create jobs for themselves. So it's a long-winded talk to kind of weave in everything, but I think that in the end, having a common purpose, let me live and let other people live. That's what we need to do. That will help. So I think it kind of balances everything together.
Okay, friends. We are at a simulcast here. Of course, thank you to all the three speakers. But I want to bring you to the notice that this simulcast is coordinated by Rotary Club of Mumbai in Nariman Point, along with the Rotary Club of Rizvi College. A common question to all three of you. We are looking at some kind of one-line message from all of you to the youth about being a part of community service. Because the volunteers over here are a part of community service. So what is a one-line message to the youth who are sitting over here, from each one of you, in one line, about a community service participation by the youth? Is it good, bad, ignore, look for a career? Come on.
He said 140 characters.
Say something.
I'm not going to start.
Okay, you're not going to start.
So is it one line one language? Message for?
To the young people. For young people, what should they be doing?
They are part of the community service. They are doing a volunteership in community, giving up their important time of studies, and they are being here as volunteers. What is the message to the other people? Should they be a part of some NGO and community service or no?
I think I myself help underprivileged kids without charging any money because they're like my friends. I think everyone should start helping our less privileged friends. I think because some of my friends do think that they're different from us, but they're no different from us. If they were our friends and if someone would have said that, I think it would have hurt our heart, and we have to imagine how much it hurts their heart. So I think everyone should be a part of this initiative. If you don't want to join an NGO, it's fine. There's so many communities next to you. Go and help those children, and I'm sure getting those smiles on their face will bring a smile to your face as well.
It's going to be more than a line. When I was in school, my best friend came from an extremely poor background. And he was so poor that in winters in Delhi, he couldn't afford a sweater. This kid taught me many things in life. He taught me how. So I remember one day we had gone to see a movie and the tickets were houseful. Those were the days when movies used to be houseful. And I was moving away from the theater and he caught my hand and he said, "Wait 1 minute. When the movie starts, these tickets which are being sold in black will have to be sold just in giveaway price, right?" And we bought a 3 rupee ticket for I think 50 paisa or something. He taught me what is a perishable commodity. Very often we think that, you taught me also, when it says houseful, seats are always available. When it says no vacancy, there is a vacancy. When they say no budget, there are budgets. This is something that we have to teach B school students after they join the corporate for about 2 years. So many people who believe that by helping in social community service, they are the ones bringing stuff to the party, they are grossly mistaken. Very, very mistaken. When you help someone else, that person is teaching you valuable life lessons, if nothing else, teaching you how blessed you are.
Well, I think my advice would be that we meaning you, ought to do something. Not doing is not an option. So do something, but do it with compassion and courage.
Thanks a lot to all the three speakers, but now it's a time for selfie. We request all the three speakers to stand up and the crowd also stand up. Our president will take a selfie with all of you. It's already started. 19 seconds. Please take your seats immediately. Lights off. Let's enjoy the next session. We have 3 more speakers coming. I'm sure you are enjoying it. Friends, simulcast. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Anybody get a chance to meet any of the speakers? I saw them wandering around like rock stars. Sonam was like, yeah, glaciers. Ishita let it go all to her head. No, she's a doll. Did anybody get to meet the speakers? Anybody? Loud noise? If you make sure you do that. It's a fantastic way to, to maximize your day. Anything else? Taxi cabs. Are they out there? I haven't had a chance to go out there. Anybody? Yeah, that's it's fantastic. I'm taking one home, so don't get those. Let's introduce our next speaker. I'm thrilled to have this individual here starting off the session. We lured her out of mission control in Bangalore. She is a mother of 2, and she is also a scientist at MOM, the Mars Orbiter mission. I guarantee you're going to want to get your Jai Hind on right now, okay? This is a thing, and it's a big one. It's from space, ladies and gentlemen. Please welcome Ritu Karidal. Is the minister here?
Today, I'll be sharing with you the story of Indian space program that goes right back to 1960s under the vision of great physicist Dr. Vikram Sarabhai. His vision of using space technology to the real problem of man and society. But then it was not an easy task for him to convince the government of the day about the relevance of the space program for a developing nation. Eventually, with all his possible efforts, he succeeded in obtaining funds. And that was when the Indian space journey began. This was how those initial days looked like. A very humble beginning with extremely limited resources. In 1975, the first Indian satellite Aryabhatta was launched. Later on, we continued our efforts to build much more advanced rockets and satellites, culminating into our first moon mission, Chandrayaan-1, which detected water on the lunar surface. After this big achievement, our next step had to be our neighbor planet Mars. But why Mars? There are many unanswered questions about Mars. Is there life on Mars? Is there water on Mars? And can it tell us something about Earth's past or Earth's future? The next reason, improving the quality of life on Earth itself. A computer algorithm which was developed for one of the space programs, when applied to X-ray images, it did a better job at detecting the early stages of breast cancer than the conventional one. So this cross-pollination of fields, innovating in one and bringing the revolutionary changes in another, it happens all the time, and it undoubtedly improves the quality of life. The main reason, to inspire the next generation of space explorers who can contribute to the future growth of a nation. And that's why ISRO's next step towards this goal was Mission to Mars. One of the toughest challenges for Mars Orbiter mission was completing this project in just 18 months with no previous heritage in interplanetary mission. In such missions, a signal takes to and fro time of 40 minutes. It is like if someone wants to switch on a bulb using a remote control from here. It will take 20 minutes for the signal to reach the bulb to come on, and then 20 more minutes to confirm whether the bulb has come on or not. Such a huge time delay. What it meant we had to build the systems capable of doing self-diagnostics, self-recovery, and executing all the loaded instructions with highest precision. Because any minutest error in executing those instructions would jeopardize the mission. And this is what had happened to many earlier missions of NASA, Russia, Japan, and China. Out of 51 missions so far, only 21 have succeeded. Success rate less than 50%. And remember, no one could achieve it at the first time. So we started working on it. While the hardware that was used was adapted from many previously successful missions, the autonomy software was almost a new venture for us. The next major challenge for MOM was to design a precise path that would take the spacecraft from Earth towards Mars, but with minimum fuel. Another obstacle we had to overcome, it was the time of launch. That comes only once in 26 months. This is because there is a particular geometry formed between Earth and Mars, which provides you an opportunity to launch with minimum fuel. So imagine if you would not have launched MOM in 2013, I would not be standing here and telling you about MOM today. Then another way we found to further minimize the fuel requirement, that was the last stage of the rocket, when it took off, it should inject the spacecraft not over India, but over Pacifics near Australia. But then we did not have any ground stations or antennas to track the vehicle on the sea. We decided to deploy 2 ships, which would take 2 months of time to reach. But then what happened? There was a huge storm over the sea. The ships could not reach in time. They got delayed by 10 days. We were racing against time. Before the time was up, on 5th of November 2013, our mighty PSLV successfully took off and put the spacecraft into its first parking orbit. The most unique part of MOM was its trajectory. You can see having the multiple slingshots. And with each sling, with each burn operation, the distance from the Earth is increasing. This is called, and 25 days later, when came the final maneuver, the spacecraft had to leave the Earth's gravity and start moving towards Mars. This is called cruising. The direction of cruise is very important. It demands an exact and accurate performance of 99.9%. Actually, many missions failed in this phase. ISRO made history on 30th November 2013 itself when MOM successfully left for the cruise in its first attempt. To show how challenging it was to achieve the correct cruise path, it would be similar like going outside right now and hit a golf ball towards a hole located in Los Angeles. Okay? The ball has to go straight into the hole. And wait, to make it even more challenging, the hole was moving. After traveling 650 millions of kilometers in 10 months of time, MOM made its closest approach to Mars. It was just 500 kilometers away. But then, reaching near to Mars doesn't mean we have achieved the mission. It should start rotating around the Mars. For that, it needed a thrust, a push into the gravity well of Mars. This is called Mars orbit insertion. It is the most critical one-time operation. If you miss it, you lose it. There is no second chance. And being the Deputy Operations Director, I, with my team, was responsible to ensure that this operation takes place as per the set configuration. Because again, any minutest error would jeopardize the entire mission. The D-Day arrived, 24th of September, 2014. At 7 a.m. IST, early in the morning, we received the first signal indicating the correct start of the auto sequence by the onboard computers. 21 minutes later, the main engine started firing. That was the time when half of the success was ensured. 4 minutes later, the signal stopped. What happened? The satellite went behind the Mars, from where no signal could reach Earth. It was as if time has stopped. Our eyes were glued to the computer screen, waiting for the data to come back. For those 26 minutes, there was complete and utter silence. And then, at 8 a.m. IST, the history was made. The hall was filled with loud cheers and claps. I could not believe I had become part of such a historic moment. MOM successfully entered Martian orbit, with many firsts in its account. The first Mars mission in the world to succeed in its first attempt. The most economical project, interplanetary project in the world. The project got realized in the shortest time of 18 months. The satellite having full-scale onboard autonomy. And above all, it was the youngest team in ISRO that worked for this mission. Today, MOM is sending huge amount of data. It has opened up a new regime for a space physicist to analyze the data and reveal some of the mysteries of Mars that's going on. I feel the major contribution of MOM can be seen in this letter by a young boy to the chairman of ISRO, expressing how proud he feels for India and he desires to join ISRO, the same desire which I had 17 years ago. While this mission Well, this mission has stirred inspiration into the veins of every Indian student. It has created an awe towards science and technology in the whole country. The bigger mission achieved was to empower 1.25 billion people and make them realize the inherent strength and power of Indians to reach a far planet and showing to the world we are second to none. Thank you.
That's phenomenal. So I got to meet so many wonderful and smart junior college and college students during the break that I thought we would have some of them introduce India's present, because they are, in fact, India's future. We tried to match their interest with the speakers. And, well, this is our first volunteer.
Hey guys, my name is Harsh Khara, and I'm a third-year engineering student from VIT Vellore. So Reeves, tell me, what's the biggest challenge you faced in your life?
Getting out of being poor, not just broke, but seriously poor.
Okay. And what's your biggest responsibility?
Taking care of my loved ones.
Okay. Now imagine a person who's tasked with revitalizing one of the biggest employers in the world and also has to cater to his loved ones. So I'm talking about the Railways Minister of India, and probably the reason why I'm here today. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Shri Suresh Prabhu.
Fantastic. Good job, Harsh. Really good job. How do you feel? Thank you, man.
Thanks so much. Short but sweet.
So, good afternoon, friends. I was just asking my friends here, what do you want me to speak on? Because I am not a literate person, so I cannot read really. So I said, let me just hear and I will just speak. So they told me to speak about the railways, which I think people rather not like to hear, but travel by railways. Don't want to hear about railways. But as you know, many things that we need to do in India to transform it into what it's capable of, making sure that we also remain at the top of the table, make sure that we enjoy the quality of life that we all entitled to. We need to do many things. And one of the main things that we need to do is also to find out the way we move around. As we have seen globally, people always, one of the things that you cannot take them away from is travel. People want to eat, people want to travel all the time, if there's a choice. And therefore, making sure that transportation, the logistics is also improved in India, we need to do many things, and one of them I'll just confine today is the railways. As you know, if you have the vision of India, I think eventually just adding to the GDP may not help. We want to really improve the quality of life. And in that, what we really need to do is to do many things put together. And that's one thing that can really transform India is railways. Why? Because this is one thing which can attract maximum investment. So that's how we create huge manufacturing, we can create employment. We can make sure that our railway system is improved so much that people will be able to travel not just for pleasure, but they will also add being business, and travel itself is business, as you know. Any one tourist brings in about 15 different kinds of jobs on-site, off-site. So railways, we decided to make it as an engine of growth, and therefore we have decided to invest about $142 billion into the next 5 years into the railways. And where are we investing the money? We are investing into customer service, whether it's food, whether it is linen, whether it is reservation system, when you book the ticket, or interiors of the train, or the railway stations, all of that put together. Many of things are work in progress, many of things have already happened. What is stated now, what I'm mentioning to you now, is something which I had mentioned in my budget. 103 of those budget announcements are implemented, and we have made some improvement. I'm not happy. I'm satisfied, but not really happy because I need to do a long way to go. But we made a beginning for sure, and that beginning is clear. We want to move in that direction. Unfortunately, I was talking to somebody, he was asking me when you think things will really happen. I said I would have been very happy if I was in the noodles business or in a instant tea business, so I could deliver immediately. But this is something like this. It takes time to happen, but we are moved into it. So what are we doing? We are first of all investing money into areas where there will be quick benefits will come. When I say quick, it's about 3 to 5 years. Like decongesting the railway lines, creating safety, making sure that the customers is improved, transparency is brought about, and the whole system is changed. And therefore, we have started making that investment. Unfortunately, for last several decades, we never invested money into the railways that we should have. As a consequence, we have lost the share of traffic to the road. We have actually deteriorated the services. Therefore, now the consumers also feel, why should I pay more because I'm not getting value for my money? In fact, that's partially true because the railway fares are really underrated. So we really need to put that into place. But that's one point. So we decided to invest. Now, where do you make the money for investment? So we didn't have much of resources coming from the government, which is the central budget. So I said first time, we'll not just keep blaming the finance minister, which has been a normal practice for not doing anything. I can point out fingers to the finance minister. So I said I will rather change that. We decided to invest money taking it from outside. Life Insurance Corporation, we got 1,50,000 crores, which will be investing into the railways. In the next 5 years, moratorium, 30 years repayment. Multilateral agencies are also giving us money for that type. And we have seen that unless you invest, you'll not get a type of benefits you want. China is a good example. I just gave you a figure of $142 billion. I know many people are asking me why so much. China has been investing $140 billion year after year for last so many years, every year. So when you make that investment, you get the outcome. So you cannot expect a magic in which without investment, you should get something like this. I wish because in the government people say I'm in Sarkar, I wish I was that Sarkar who could do this magic. But I am not, unfortunately, that Sarkar, the famous magician of the world. And therefore, we really need to find out how do you make that investment. We need money. Money had to be found from somewhere. We did that. In last few months itself, we have actually sanctioned contracts for 40,000 crores to one of the world's largest companies like GE and Alstom, which will create a huge ecosystem, investment in Bihar, one of the backward states of the country, so that they will get employment, the ecosystem will get developed, and the entire ecosystem will also bring in that type of a manufacturing activity into the part of a global supply chain. So we are doing that. We are also making sure that we create a proper regulatory framework. I mentioned about a fare and freight. We need to have a proper rational means of deciding what should be the fare and what should be the freight. So we are creating independent mechanism which will actually address this issue. We are also making sure that the interiors of train are fully changed. We are developing 400 stations, existing stations, which will go vertical. And there will be, I have got a design of one of the stations. If you look at it, you will not believe that it's not even an airport because this is better than that. But that's something which we need to implement. But we are already under implementation of this program, 400 stations, completely transparent basis. I mentioned you one more thing. I'm looking at the clock all the time, is transparency. And the transparency is something which is so critical. As a minister of railways, people always wanted to be ministers of different portfolios because it's something we call it power. I thought the power is not important. What is important is the delivery of the services to the people. So how did service to the people delivery ultimately takes place? It must happen at a place where there is an interaction of per person with the government official. So I delegated all my powers to the general managers, to the divisional railway managers, and now some of them to the station masters as well. Why? Because that's the cutting edge where the people meet the real service providers. And if you don't have the powers, how can you make them accountable? So power has been given, not in last 1 year that I have been a minister, more than a year. Not a single tender has come to me, which used to be the normal business of the minister, which is no longer there with me. Secondly, we are now going into the next level of power has been given. Now bring accountability. So we are creating key result area for each of the functionary, and he has to deliver on those areas in the parameter that has been decided for him. So we are going ahead with that, and that will also bring in transparency. In fact, all the tenders and all the contracts will eventually, not by end of this year, will be completely on eat and drink platform. So there is no more possibility, we'll bring in more transparency, including employment. I know there was a problem. People always used to be hoodwinked by the so-called touts by saying that I will offer you a job. I don't know how, but he could only get money because he was offering something which he could never do. Therefore, we are bringing completely transparent system of examination, online examination. And that will also reduce the kind of corruption. Promotions, posting, appointments were all part of that. That also we have created a very transparent process. So transparency is something which is people always look for, which is an integral part of the good governance, which our Prime Minister also believes, we believe in very strongly. So we are trying to do that. So we are trying to completely change the way the railway is operated. By doing this, what's my vision, if you want to know, by 2030? Why 2030? Because I feel for something like railways, we have to run the railways, we have to keep on expansion, we have to keep on modernizing, we have to make sure that the human resource, which my friend just was saying, the largest employer, how the human resource is developed at the same time, so there are very complex issues to be done. In any case, a new line to be put up take 3 to 5 years, and therefore we have decided that we will now have 5-year cycle. First cycle, 5 years, which I already mentioned in my budget speech. Next 5 years will be investing double this amount, or we should invest. And that is what will bring in some sort of a parity to global standards. But I not be happy only with coming out with parity with global standards. I will rather be happy with our railway system should be one of the best in the world. And if that to happen, we really need another probably few more years after that. And therefore, I am creating a vision for 2030 in which service will be globally benchmarked, safety will be as good as what we have best in the world. In fact, I've already tied up with Japan for that. Whatever is a investment that we make in railways will generate huge employment, also create a huge economic impetus. In my opinion, railway alone will be able to add 2.5 to 3% to GDP as we go along. Also, the target is that we must not only improve the efficiency of rail operations, but also reduce the cost of transportation. Because unless we are globally competitive, input costs have to be competitive, and one of the major input costs going to be for Make in India, for any other major economic program, is how do you make business with least cost possible. And therefore, all this is aimed for that. So I am very sure that if we continue like this, what we are doing today, by 2030, we'll be able to bring in real change. One last point, I'm trying to work on a very different type of an accounting system for the country, for the railways to begin with. We start with budgeting, expenditure, output, and outcome. If you can integrate costing, bookkeeping, management information system, management accounting into one, we'll be able to derive maximum benefit from the government expenditure that we incur. Because again, what's going to be critical is, how do you make sure that every rupee spent in India, public expenditure, results into at least 1 rupee benefit for the system. And that's why the change of accounting system will bring in not only transparency, accountability, but also bring in efficient to system. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Yes, nailed it. I'd like to ask you just a couple questions. I would like you to elaborate on a story that we've maybe all heard about you. It's the story of the woman on the train who tweeted your personal account and said that she was uncomfortable in her bogie. She gave you the PNR. You DM'd her or wrote her back? And is this, you know what I'm talking about?
No, I didn't get it. What did you say?
This story about a woman on one of the trains?
No, I don't think I should I should not be patting my own back for doing something like this, which is so minimum that we can deliver to the people. This is our job.
Okay.
To deliver service to the people.
Just in case you don't know the
really
story.
mean it,
Yeah.
Because this is what I keep telling all the railway employees, that, we should not be feeling that, we have done something exceptionally good, which we are supposed to be normally be doing. Now it is why we feel that it is something exceptional, because we have never done it in the past. Because we always felt that as a government, it is not our job to help people. I think this is not our job to help people. It is our job, it's a duty to make sure that we deliver to the people.
Well, I understand. That's an excellent definition of exceptional, actually. So the story, in case you don't know, there was a woman in a car. She was uncomfortable with one of the passengers.
That's my job, not my duty.
Just to give the background. And she tweeted to your personal account, and Mr. Prabhu answered her on his account, and at the next station, there were authorities to, I think, escort the fellow off. Is that what it is? Took care of the problem. I think it's an excellent mention that you make. Would you like to talk a little bit more about that, about how the individual can impact then India's future? This sense of responsibility, personal responsibility?
You know, it's always, there are two things which are really needed for change. One, you must change the system. If you don't change the system, it is not institutionalized. So if you don't institutionalize the change happens and the change disappears. So what is important is institutionalization of change. But how do you institutionalize if there is no individual? So therefore, we need both the things at the same time. We need leadership to change it, but we also need system to institutionalize it. So if you think that only institutionalized change can happen, automatically never happens. Somebody has to push it. But to make pushing, we need to put your own self behind it, stick your neck out, because many times failure is always possible. And therefore, people always try to take it easy by saying, no, I'm not responsible, so I'm not doing anything. So now, rather than doing that, let me make an effort, let me push best foot forward. If I succeed, it will be good for them. If I fail, I will take it as my personal failure, but I will make sure that my job as a minister will not be complete unless I give 100% to the job.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, Shri Suresh Prabhu. Thank you very much. Very much appreciated.